studios. Brian Sexton and John Oehser are with me as we're going to recap the Combine for you from last week and also talk a little bit about free agency, which is about a week away at this point. So let's start out with our big things today. First big thing is first impressions. GM James Gladstone was introduced to us last week and kicked things off right away by heading to the Combine and getting to work. And he's talking a little bit to us about what it's going to be like getting integrated with his new team.
In terms of, what you may say is me getting up to speed, I'm going to calibrate my own mode of operation to the Jaguars' current mode of operation. One person changing rather than a large group changing in the immediate mode is going to be a little bit more efficient and less disruptive.
Brian, there's a lot of new faces around here right now. They are all in Indianapolis last week getting to work together. What are your first impressions of James Gladstone from what we've seen so far?
Well, I told Jeff Lageman during our live broadcast before his introductory press conference that I had talked to a friend who used to work here, who now works there, who said that James Gladstone, in a building filled with stars, great people, very successful people, that Rams organization has produced a spider web of people all across the NFL because of the way they do things. But that Gladstone, in a building filled with stars, shined as bright or brighter than almost all of them. And the more that you listen to him and, get a feel for a 34-year-old guy with the presence, with the wisdom to say what he just said, it verifies what I was told, that the guy is made for this position. And no one out there in LA expects anything but incredible success from Gladstone. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, he's really, really, really sharp. I mean, in talking to him a couple of times at the Combine, the thing that stands out is his ability to communicate. And it's difficult to overemphasize that trait in a GM, his ability to take an idea, a concept, a trait that he wants in a player, and make it so everybody in the organization clearly understands what a team is looking for. That goes to messaging, it goes to player trait, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to be really, really good at this. And, that doesn't guarantee results on the field, but, because nothing does. But this guy's communication skills, along with Liam Cohen's energy, focus, it gives the organization a chance.
Let's go to our second big thing today, which is going to be hunkered down when we're talking about getting things going, hitting the ground running with them. Of course, James Gladstone talked a little bit about with the new EVP, Tony Baselli, and of course, new head coach, Liam Cohen. All of them traveled to Indianapolis together, kind of hunkered down.
The fact that we're a new coaching staff, a new general manager working with our scouting staff, this is a great opportunity for an offsite and just build some of the connective tissue that otherwise wouldn't necessarily exist because we'd just be in our normal mode of operation in Jacksonville.
John, you always send a team, if you work for a team, you always send some people to the Combine, but they pretty much send everybody from the new front office out there to kind of work together and get things going.
Yeah, they did, and I'm not sure how long they will do it this way. The Rams historically don't go to the Combine except with a small number of people, so maybe that's the Jaguars' approach going forward. I think this approach this year was about, okay, we need to go to the Combine, we need to get this thing established. They also looked at it as very much, let's move the facilities out there, let's move the workforce out there as a chance for everybody to get to know each other, to build some camaraderie, to build some chemistry. A very expensive team building, if you will. But I think that's important at this stage, and they were certainly approaching it like that.
Well, and it's every day now that they're back, Kai. I mean, these guys are here in the building, and they're working late nights and early mornings, some Saturdays and Sundays. It's hard to take a day off when you have as much coming at them as is coming at them. You mentioned free agency begins next week, and then you're going to have guys who are out on the pro day tour, and before you know it, you'll have the the out of season program, right, where the guys are back in, I think April 7th is when that starts, and then the draft and then OTAs. They have a lot of ground to cover in a very short period of time. So that was just the jump start to getting guys, who each individual person is, kind of names and faces, because now the real work begins to get ready.
That leads us into our final big thing, which is free agency. We've talked about all the changes in the offseason, and now free agency is upon us, about a week away at this point. So, Brian, when you're looking at what the players are going to be in this, because in the past the Jaguars have had to do a lot through free agency, but now with a new coaching staff, you might have to address some needs as well. So do we have any inkling of which way they might be going with this?
Not really. I mean, listen, the DNA of this organization has been to use free agency to build the roster. but all at the same time professing they didn't want to do it that way. The most successful teams in the last 10 years, 15 years, maybe the modern era of the NFL, have built through the draft. Now, you're talking about a very strong Rams presence in the building now, and they're asymmetrical thinkers. I mean, they were trading first-round picks to grab veteran guys. We know about Jalen Ramsey and many, many others, Dante Fowler Jr., players who ended up out there. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. It'll depend on their evaluation of the roster. There are a couple guys here they could move with. They've got some room. They could play if they want. I just don't know whether they want to or not, John.
Yeah, I think they'll have a plan. They'll go after some guys, some traits. It's important to remember the Rams did what Brian's talking about when they were going after it, and they feel like they were close to the Super Bowl. I don't think the Jaguars will necessarily try to build the roster that way. When Gladstone talked philosophically at the Combine last week, he talked far more about the fact that the Jaguars have more draft picks in the next 2 years than any other team. He likes that. I think he's going to lean toward that. No team really wants to build their roster through free agency. It's when you don't draft and develop well that you wind up having to. So I think you will see free agency used this year to make up for some roster holes they need to address quickly. But I think overall, it's going to try to be draft and develop. They just have to draft well.
Just draft well. It's easy enough. It sounds that way anyway. Stay with us. We're going to talk a little bit about what went down at the Combine last week.
Floridians, do you know how close you are to freshness? It's not a plane or a ship ride away. It's not across an ocean or over the equator. It's not even a far drive. The peak of freshness is at your grocery store, and it's called Fresh from Florida. Fresh from Florida is local produce grown by farmers right here in our own state, meaning it's always fresh, always in season, and always mouth-wateringly good. Look for the sunny Fresh from Florida logo or ask for it by name where you shop.
Hey, I'm Logan Cook, punter for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Driving distracted or stolen is dangerous for you, and it's dangerous for everyone on the road around you. Ride with Do Not Disturb. That call, text, or social media message can wait. Choose your music before you turn on the ignition. Anytime your eyes are not on the road ahead, you're distracted, so pay attention. But remember, drive high equals DUI. Plan ahead, have a designated driver, keep a clear head to see clear ahead, and let's get everyone home safely.
Jacksonville builders score big with DL Cabinetry. As the official cabinet supplier of the Jacksonville Jaguars, they offer top quality kitchen and bathroom cabinetry for any project. Enjoy fast turnaround, complimentary design, and great prices. Visit dlcabinetry.com today to learn more and to become a dealer. Limited spots available. DL Cabinetry, the winning choice for builders.
You know what? One of the most alluring and intriguing pieces to this opportunity was the fact that the leadership group and the dynamic actually mirrors what I'm most familiar with in Los Angeles. So it was one that I could see a clear visual for finding success. So really excited about the opportunity to work with Tony and Liam and support both of them and bring Liam's vision to life here in these next few weeks and into the later portion of the spring through the draft.
New General Manager James Gladstone, the final piece of this front office puzzle that they've been putting together for the last couple months at this point. Excited to all be in place now, Brian. I think we finally know where everything is going, and now we can kind of get everything pushed off that way.
Yeah, they've got a plan, and he's mentioned it. We've all talked about it. We don't know exactly what the plan is at this point, but they're figuring their way out. John, you figure the most important thing for them to be doing right now is to have a full evaluation of the roster, what each of these individual coaches thinks about what he's got.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what last week was about, meaning the coaching staff had clearly grinded through the roster in the week or so before the Combine. And then at the Combine last week, there was a lot of meetings about, okay, this is the roster, this is the free agency plan. How do you get that going with the draft preparations? It's important to note that, and Gladstone and Cohen both went into this deep last week, this is about the schedule that most teams have. I mean, you start getting ready for free agency with the Combine. The cram for the test phase, so to speak, is them digging into their own roster. the coaches trying to figure out, okay, this is what we have. It's encouraging, I think, that Tony Boselli yesterday, when I was talking to him for the Tony Boselli podcast, the EVP podcast, we're going to call it, said Gladstone's interpretation of the roster already was dead on, very in line with what Tony had seen. And Tony is, I guess, really the guy in the unique position. He has some muscle memory on these guys, the ability to absorb what they've done over the course of time, whereas everybody else is sort of cramming for the test.
How much should be made of, we talk about, each of them reporting to the owner separately, right? So it's maybe not a typical power dynamic of reporting to your boss and reporting up. They all kind of will report to Shad Khan. And is there something to be said for that? Or if you're all actually kind of working together on the same page, hopefully there's not a ton of infighting that you really need to be going around each other.
Well, they were very deliberate in their timeline to grab the right general manager, because it was pretty clear. I mean, Liam is the leader over here in terms of football, and Tony's going to handle football operations. And Shad said at the introductory news conference last week that what he was really looking for was a group of 3 guys who could work together, so he didn't have to be the guy who was the thread. And at various times, he has had to be that guy. So I guess the Gladstone coming in and the deliberate way that they went about finding the right guy means that those 3 men will be able to put their finger on the right moves, whether it's free agency, the draft, the execution from a football operations standpoint, and all 3 will communicate to the owner, who's not going to necessarily be that common thread like he has been in the past.
Yeah, there's certainly, this plan works until you're 0-13 and everybody's like mad at each other. That's sort of the cynicist's or cynical person's point of view. But I thought Cohen said it best last week when he said, look, if we're grinding through and talking about a player and we just can't find middle ground, this is clearly the way the Rams work, because Gladstone said it a couple of times, well, then we move on from the player. And I think that makes the most sense. Cohen's going to be coaching the team. Gladstone won't be involved with that. So this, final say thing comes down to those rare occasions, and it doesn't happen that often, even when guys aren't getting along, when you just can't agree. And I think they both saw with the Rams that you can get to a certain point, and then you get a feeling of, you know what, if we're at odds about this guy, then he's not going to work here. It doesn't make any sense. So I think it works fine.
Look, it became a storyline in the early 90s when Bill Parcells left the Giants and went to the Patriots. He had a general manager everywhere he was, and he uttered the famous line, if I'm going to cook the meal, I should be able to go and buy the groceries. And at various times that's worked. The model that really has worked is what's worked in Kansas City in recent years, and that is that Andy Reid hired Brent Veach, who is his GM, and he gets him the players that he wants. That's the model that works. However they structure it, reporting to the owner, Liam had a strong say in who the general manager was going to be, because those 2 men had to be able to communicate about exactly the players he wanted to make the system. John said, Liam's coaching the team. Gladstone's job is to bring him the players that he wants. I
think the phrase coach-centric organization, which is kicked around, and Shad's really talked about that really now since the Urban Meyer hire, that that's what he wants. Yep. It's certainly what Boselli believes he's here to do. He said any number of times, I'm the left tackle of the organization. I'm here to support what's going on. And I think that's really the spirit of what Gladstone and Boselli are.
The other thing about Tony is he's a common sense guy, right? I mean, he understands. People know him from Happy Hour with Pete, where the 2 would, butt heads and battle and spar verbally. But Tony's a guy who can bring consensus to a room as well. I've seen it over time. He's a guy who can sit in there and talk through some things. He's got a little diplomat in him. People don't give him credit for that.
I think it's the offensive lineman in him. You got to get everybody on the same page and all working together.
In the Jaguars' golden era, he was the leader in the locker room. Not the quarterback, not the receiver, no one on defense. Tony Boselli was the leader, and he understood that he had to set the tone. And at times in this new arrangement, there may be times where he has to help bring everyone together for the common tone.
We're talking a little bit about James Gladstone because he's the newest addition to this. 34 years old, obviously. It's a youth movement all around here in Jacksonville right now. John, did you hear anything at the Combine? Obviously, you don't hear a ton about front office people until they take over as a GM somewhere. So what have we heard so far about him?
Well, basically that what you see in the press conferences is what he is, meaning Sean McVay was on the Pat McAfee show and pretty insightful in terms of saying exactly what we've already said about James Gladstone. His ability to communicate, I think Sean's quote was, I could just sit in a room and listen to this guy. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of see that when he's on the podium, even though he's only 34, he has an interesting way of talking about things. It's easy to see how if you're a wide receivers coach or an area scout, you sit and you listen to this guy and you know what he's talking about. And that's really the important trait of this general manager position. That person has to make sure that everybody who's involved with talent acquisition, with direction, understands what we're looking for in a special teamer, in an offensive lineman, and they all have to be on the same page. That's not that easy to do. It's a job of intelligence, player evaluation, but more than anything, it's a job of communication because you're dealing with a lot of moving parts.
I had it explained to me by somebody in Los Angeles who said that he is where he is because he was never scared to step into a challenging situation that maybe exceeded his skill set when he got there in 2016 and went out there with Les Snead. And it quickly became apparent that he could work his way through situations that were maybe beyond him at the point, and he raced to this point where he now, 9 years later, is the general manager because he is able to see situations for what they are and work right through them. He always took on the big challenge.
And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a good challenge. Stay with us here on Jags A.M. Coming up after the break, we'll talk a little bit about free agency and the draft and what the focuses might be for the Jags.
To aim higher, run faster. It's what elite athletes do. Always strive for better. At UF Health, we have that same DNA to not just treat a stroke, but to create a fleet of mobile stroke treatment units, to not just do research, but to use AI to save lives with one of the most powerful supercomputers in academia. We believe, like athletes, that human progress has no finish line. UF Health, National Medical Center for Team USA.
Don't make a bad call when it comes to servicing your home. Cooling off with a baby pool in the house to fix your air conditioning problem is a bad call. Trying to catch a wave in a flooded bathroom is a bad call. Using a burning electrical panel to make s'mores is a bad call. The next time something goes wrong, make a good call to Donovan.
Whether you need air, electric, or plumbing service, Donovan is always a good call. It's why we've been trusted by our customers for almost 40 years and why you can trust us to deliver fast, reliable service to your home. Donovan, always a good call.
Visit DonovanAC.com today.
Hey, I'm Logan Cook, punter for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Driving distracted or stolen is dangerous for you, and it's dangerous for everyone on the road around you. Ride with Do Not Disturb. That call, text, or social media message can wait. Choose your music before you turn on the ignition. Anytime your eyes are not on the road ahead, you're distracted, so pay attention. But remember, drive high equals DUI. Plan ahead, have a designated driver, keep a clear head to see clear ahead, and let's get everyone home safely.
Voted the coolest office space in Jacksonville. You can apply online at MagellanLogistics.com.
He's so dynamic, being able to move him around, where you saw him at LSU maybe not do some of those things, right? Where he was mostly outside, running more linear routes, vertical posts, some overs, and then the stop. So the ability for him to snap down, get in the slot, be able to run some of the choice routes, looky routes, and then, oh, by the way, you can throw him a screen and he can go do something with it. Our pass game will run through him, and super excited to get to work with him.
I mean, you have to be excited to get to work with Brian Thomas Jr. Obviously, Liam Cohen talking about BTJ and what he's going to be able to do with him going forward. I'm excited to see his second season as well, because we saw him develop as the season went along, maybe that second half even with Mac Jones at quarterback, what he was able to do. Second year is going to be fun.
Well, working with Trevor Lawrence consistently, it would be fun. I mean, if you look back at Trevor, he is good at throwing the deep ball. And we saw a few of those shots with Brian last year, the one in particular against the Patriots at Wembley. Yeah. When you consider what Brian was able to do with Mac, who does not have the deep ball accuracy or even the deep ball arm that Trevor does, it's easy to get excited.
Yeah, and then there was the play against the Colts here when he basically showed everybody how he can separate and hit that second gear. Clearly, as Liam said, the offense will run through him. They have a potential franchise quarterback and a franchise wide receiver to work with. That's a good start.
All right, we're going to do a little this or that right now, and we're going to go through some position groups and do this or that with draft or free agency. So we're looking at wide receivers. Obviously, BTJ is going to be your number one. You're going to run the offense through him, but who's going to be surrounding him? There's questions about whether Christian Kirk will be here or not. Are you going to look at maybe possibly drafting someone? Brian, if you're looking at the wide receiver group, where do you want to see additions there, or none at all?
Well, not knowing what's going to happen with Christian, or even Evan Ingram, who I know he's a tight end, but let's be honest, he's a receiver. He had 114 receptions in 2023. Draft, right? There are, because of the way that college football plays now, there are receivers throughout the draft. Whether you're talking about a star at the top of the first round or, finding a good player somewhere in the middle rounds, you've got a lot of money tied up in Christian Kirk, and if he's going to be here, draft.
Yeah, I hope both Christian and Evan are here. For the purposes of this question, let's assume they're not, because you have to have some sort of parameter to answer the question. I think if they're not, then I think you could see a element of both a receiver, meaning either a relatively high-profile free agent, lower receiver, or vice versa. If I had to lean, I would say probably a mid-tier receiver who they feel like can fill a role, and then maybe draft the position in the first 3 rounds-ish, because I think coming from the Rams, I think there's probably a belief with these guys we can get Cooper Kupp-ish player. They've had success in later rounds, so my guess is, without talking to him specifically, that they feel like receiver can be acquired in that range.
Receivers become a premium position, and as such, they are expensive, which is why I would lean into the draft on that one.
A lot of these options can be expensive. We've talked a ton about the lines on both sides. The trenches need to get better. When you're looking at offensive line and defensive line, that could be a focus at 5 in the first round. We don't know exactly where they're going to go with that yet, but you need depth on both of those positions, I think it's fair to say. So is this a combination of both, or do you think it just has to be drafted?
Well, listen, it's a really good draft for defensive tackles, and not just at the top of the draft. There are good tackle options, into the second and even the third round from what I'm hearing. So I would lean on the defensive side too young. You've got a couple of young guys that you want to develop already. And you still have Devon Hamilton here. Draft there. Offensive line, I would look for some veteran presence. Now, keep in mind, the Jaguars drafted Brandon Linder in the 3rd round, and he was an 8-year starter here and a really good player. You can find those guys in the middle rounds if you do your due diligence. But you're probably going to want to find a couple of those guys in free agency as well. And guards are not necessarily as expensive, so you can do some work there in free agency.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you're going to get great top-of-the-market guy, they're all expensive.
But do you need that? I mean, you want that, but do you need to go pay the top of the market? Do you need an A.J. Cann kind of guy who is a moderate price point?
Yeah, I think on the interior of the line, they need somebody to come in and be a presence and be, I think, what they hoped that Sheriff would be. Sheriff was a decent player here, past his prime, I think, but a solid player for 3 years, but didn't necessarily dominate the middle. Personality-wise, didn't dominate the locker room. I think you'd like to find that in free agency so you have some immediate presence. Defensive line feels like, everybody's mocking Mason Graham. It feels like that has a good chance to be the pick. Interesting, you wonder how long-term they're going to develop the tackle position. I don't know that they go premium there. At some point, you wonder how they're going to build that long-term, but that's to be played out.
The funny thing is you look at the best tackles at the top of this draft and everyone's questioning whether they belong inside a guard or not, whether they're tall enough or have the length to play there. This is not a good draft for tackles, but it is a good draft for interior offensive linemen.
Which is what we need, so.
Perhaps that's the pick.
Not bad. All right, a final position and group we're going to go with is defensive backs, safety and corner. Obviously, corner depth was an issue this year. Safety, Andre Cisco is becoming a free agency, so there might be an opening there if they don't re-sign him. Do you think this is a free agency drafting situation? Where do you think they'll go with this, John?
Yes.
All the things.
Yeah, because they have a lot of work to do. I mean, it's you could see potentially, I think Jerry Jones and Tyson Campbell are the guys that I know out of the group that was there last year will be on the field. Yeah. I think some of the other guys will compete and maybe one of them will be in it, but I think they've got a lot of work to do. So second, third round, one first-tierish guy in free agency. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I think when you've got depth corner, meaning fourth, maybe two safeties, I don't quite know how to say where they'll go with what. I think they may let the draft come to them and free agency come to them, because it's sort of, you have to throw some resources here.
Yeah, well, listen, we don't know that the Jaguars are going to stay at 5. They might get an offer and they could move back if someone wants to come up and get a quarterback. The Raiders are sitting at 6. Maybe this is a spot where the Jags can move back, and there are some first-round safeties, some elite-level guys. I would like the Cisco of 2022 and 2023 back. The guy who played here last year, I mean, listen, he had all the motivation in the world to go out and have a big year because they didn't pay him, and he didn't do it. So I fully expect them to let him walk, which means they're going to have to go find a guy.
There are some options in free agency, so I'm sure they'll dabble in that a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more next week about who they might be targeting specifically. Stay with us on Jags A.M. Coming up after the break, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on the rest of the week.
When it rains, it better drain. If storm drains on your commercial property aren't doing their job, this is a major liability that needs to be corrected. Call Duck Duck Rooter to have your storm drains jetted and cleaned with our powerful vac con truck. We'll clear the way for better drainage. Call 904-862-6769. Visit DuckDuckRooter.com. Proud partner of the Jacksonville Jags. Duck Duck Rooter, your fully insured certified plumbing and underground utility contractor.
Can you imagine rising for work before the crack of dawn? Tending to hundreds of acres of land before dusk? Well, that's what happens on 47,000 Florida farms every day. Florida's farmers work hard to grow nutritious food for you and your family. And you can help support them by enjoying delicious Fresh from Florida produce. Look for the sunny Fresh from Florida logo where you shop, or visit freshfromflorida.com to learn more.
And that's a Magellan first down.
Move the freight, move the freight, move the freight.
Would you like to control your own income? Work at Magellan Transport. Voted the coolest office space in Duval. Bring your talents and let your career flourish. Visit their website at MagellanLogistics.com and apply online. Trust service. Trust Magellan.
Jags A.M. brought to you by Fresh from Florida. It's always in season.
The development of Baker will be different than Trevor. It just will be because of the different type of player. But you see a lot of the same intangibles in terms of the work ethic, the want to. He wants to be great. He wants to be coached hard. And the process. Like, how do we get him on a schedule, a process every single day that he can follow to get him to the point that he feels like he's playing at a higher level?
And Cohen talking a little bit about what it was like working with Baker Mayfield, but how it's going to be different working with Trevor Lawrence. And we know they want to get in the building, kind of go over the X's and O's. There are some limitations to that, John, with when they can meet. We'll see this probably hit the ground a little bit more in April.
Yeah, it starts. They can talk minimally because you're allowed to talk to human beings. Sure. But in terms of any sort of football, real game planning meeting, anything like that, that starts up when the off-season program
April
begins.
7th.
And that's plenty of time. I mean, that's, but that'll be when the fun starts.
All the fun.
You know, one of the reasons why Baker Mayfield was able to take that big jump last year was because the Buccaneers running game went from bottom 5 to top 5, right? Mm-hmm. So we were talking about offensive line and getting that right, getting the running game going, and they proved it last year in Tampa. Liam proved what he can do. I'm going to be really interested in that. I know we talk about Brian Thomas and wide receivers, and you know that's the sexy talk in the NFL these days. But that ground game is going to be really important for the coach to get the quarterback where he wants to be.
And being able to rely on that consistently in every game will be huge.
Which we have not had around here in a while.
Yeah, Gladstone at the Combine didn't reveal everything they're going to do, obviously, because you don't. But he did sort of open the hand a little bit. When asked about the roster, he said, you know, the guys in the trenches, I'm paraphrasing, and guys who can score. Yeah. So, you know, sort of keep that in mind when trying to figure out free agency in the draft.
Free agency begins on Monday. Things open up. They can start talking. We'll announce things on Wednesday. And on Tuesday, we'll be in here to talk to you about what we think the Jags might do. Enjoy your week.